Attackers are already running code on unpatched Palo Alto firewalls right now. Not maybe able to, not proof of concept exists in the wild. Active exploitation. That's where we start. CVE 2026-0300 is a buffer overflow in PAN-OS, the operating system that runs Palo Alto's physical and virtual firewall appliances. The CVSS score is 9, 3 out of 10. The attack vector is network accessible, requires no authentication, and no user interaction. If your User-ID Authentication Portal is exposed to the internet, or even to any untrusted network segment, an attacker can send a crafted request and execute arbitrary code on the device. Not read config, not crash the box. Execute code on your firewall, which is, by design, the thing sitting between your internal network and everything else. Let's talk about what a buffer overflow in this specific context actually means operationally. PAN-OS is a hardened, proprietary OS running on appliances that most organizations treat as trusted infrastructure. Firewalls don't get the same patch cadence scrutiny as your application servers. They sit in racks, they process packets, and engineers touch them when something breaks, or when a compliance audit forces a review. That operational reality is exactly why vulnerabilities like this are so dangerous. The attack surface has been sitting there, and the patching muscle memory is weak. The specific trigger condition here is the User-ID Authentication Portal being reachable from untrusted networks. User-ID is the PAN-OS feature that maps IP addresses to Active Directory usernames, and the Authentication Portal is the web interface that can be used to authenticate users who haven't been identified by other means. It's commonly enabled in environments where users are on guest networks, or where Kerberos and domain-joined authentication isn't universal. It's also, not infrequently, left exposed to the internet because someone configured it years ago for a specific use case and nobody reviewed the network exposure since. That's your threat model right there. Now, what's actually confirmed versus what's unclear from the reporting. Palo Alto has confirmed the vulnerability exists, has assigned the CVE, published an advisory, and released patches. They have confirmed active exploitation in the wild, which means they or a third party have observed real attack traffic or found indicators of compromise on customer devices, not just a researcher dropping a proof of concept on GitHub. The specific nature of the exploitation, whether it's targeted or opportunistic, which threat actors are involved, and what post-exploitation payloads are being deployed, that's unclear from the reporting available as of now. Palo Alto's advisories tend to be conservative with attribution details in the initial release, so expect more detail in subsequent updates. What versions are affected? This is where you need to go directly to Palo Alto's security advisory rather than trust any summary, including this one. Buffer overflow vulnerabilities in firmware and OS products frequently have complex version matrices. Certain feature flags, certain deployment modes, certain hardware platforms. The CVSS 9.3 score applies specifically when the authentication portal is internet accessible, but the underlying vulnerability may exist more broadly. Check the advisory, check your version, and check your network exposure before you do anything else. The patch path. Palo Alto has released fixes. If you're on a support contract, which you almost certainly are given the cost of these appliances, you have access to the patched builds. The operational question is your maintenance window policy. For a CVSS 9.3 with confirmed active exploitation, the standard answer is you don't wait for the next scheduled window. You treat this as an emergency change. Your change management process should have an emergency track. Use it. If you cannot patch immediately for some reason, the mitigation is straightforward in principle and possibly painful in practice. Restrict access to the authentication portal. If it's exposed to the internet, it should not be. Full stop. If it's exposed to broad internal segments, tighten that. Palo Alto's advisories typically include workaround guidance, and in this case, restricting network access to the portal interface is the expected interim control. Do that first, then plan the patch. Let's talk about detection, because patching is only part of the response. If active exploitation is confirmed, you need to ask whether you were hit before you knew about this. Check your PAN-OS logs for anomalous authentication portal traffic. Look for unexpected outbound connections from the firewall management plane. Look for configuration changes that weren't made by your team. Palo Alto's Cortex XDR and the Threat Prevention subscription can help here if you have them, but even without those products, The device logs themselves are your first source. If you have a SIEM ingesting PAN-OS syslogs, query for portal access from external IPs in the last 30 to 60 days. There's a broader pattern worth naming here. This is at least the third high-severity PAN-OS vulnerability in the past 18 months to reach confirmed active exploitation status. CVE 2024-3400 in 2024, the Global Protect Command Injection flaw was a CVSS 10.0 and was exploited by a sophisticated threat actor before the patch was available. Before that, authentication bypass issues in the management interface. Palo Alto appliances are high-value targets because they're perimeter devices, they're trusted, and they run complex proprietary code that processes untrusted input. That's a combination that produces vulnerabilities. This is not a reason to abandon the platform, but it is a reason to treat these devices with the same patching discipline you apply to your most exposed application servers, and to make sure your detection coverage includes the firewall itself, not just the traffic flowing through it. One thing the tech press coverage of this story mostly skips is the supply chain angle. Organizations that use Palo Alto firewalls as part of a managed security service, or that have outsourced their network operations, need to verify that their provider has patched on their behalf. Don't assume. Ask explicitly, get confirmation with version numbers, and get it in writing if your contract requires it. Managed security providers have their own patch cadence pressures, and your exposure is your problem regardless of whose hands the keyboard is in. On the disclosure and advisory quality side, Palo Alto's security advisories are generally well-structured compared to the industry average. They include affected versions, CVSS breakdowns, workarounds, and patch availability in a single document. The weakness is that initial advisories sometimes lack the technical depth that would let you independently assess exploitability, and the version matrices can be complex enough that you need to read carefully. The Hacker News article that sourced this story is a reasonable signal amplifier, but adds nothing technical beyond the advisory itself. Go to the primary source at security. Palo Alto Networks.com. Here is what you actually do right now. Pull up your asset inventory and identify every PAN-OS device in your environment, including versions. Check whether the authentication portal is enabled and what networks can reach it. If it's reachable from untrusted networks, restrict that access today, before the patch window. Open an emergency change request for patching against the versions Palo Alto specifies as fixed. Query your logs for portal access anomalies going back 30 days. And if you have managed services handling these devices, send that email right now asking for patch confirmation with version numbers. That's the list. Everything else can wait.